Jake Morrison sat in the cold metal chair and watched the alien council members argue about his people. The giant space station called Nexus Prime held creatures from 50 different worlds, but none of them wanted humans to join their special group. The inner circle was for the best species only, and they did not think humans were good enough. Captain Morrison wore his best uniform, the dark blue one with all his war medals. He had fought in 3 different battles against space pirates, and saved 2 colonies from attacks. His gray hair was cut short, and his face showed the lines of a man who had seen too much fighting. At 42 years old, he was getting too old for combat, but he was still the best Earth had to offer. The council chamber was huge, with seats arranged in a circle around the center where Morrison sat alone. Each alien looked different and strange. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few seemed to be made of crystal or metal. They all spoke in their own languages, but the translation devices made their words clear enough. "Humans are weak," said Krextel, the tall crystal being from Zephyr, whose voice sounded like breaking glass. "They have no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. They are just animals that learn to use tools." Morrison wanted to stand up and shout, but he knew that would only make things worse. He had to stay calm and professional even when these creatures insulted his entire species. Sektar was next to speak. The lizard-like alien from Vorth stood 8 feet tall with green scales and yellow eyes that never blinked. "We have watched humans for 50 years, he said with a voice like grinding rocks. "They fight each other more than they fight their enemies. They destroy their own planet and cannot even agree on simple laws. Why should we trust them with the secrets of the inner circle?" The other council members made sounds of agreement. Some hissed, others clicked their tongues, and a few just nodded their large heads. Morrison felt his anger growing, but he kept his hands folded in his lap and his face blank. "Captain Morrison may speak for his species," said the council leader. A floating blob of purple energy called Nexara. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Morrison stood slowly and looked around the circle of alien faces. He had practiced this speech for months, working with Earth's best diplomats to find the right words. "Honorable council members," he began, "humanity asks for your consideration not because we are perfect, but because we are willing to learn and grow. Yes, we have made mistakes, but we have also shown that we can change and become better." He paused and looked directly at Krextel. "You say we have no natural weapons or armor, and you are right. But we have something else. We have the ability to adapt and survive in any situation. We have imagination and the will to never give up, no matter how bad things get." "Pretty words," said Sektar with a laugh that sounded like metal scraping. "Stone, but words mean nothing. Anyone can talk. We need proof that humans deserve to stand among the great races of the galaxy." Morrison felt his heart sink. He had expected this, but hearing it still hurt. What kind of proof would satisfy the council? The aliens looked at each other and began speaking in their own languages again. Morrison could not understand the words, but he could see they were planning something. After several minutes, Sektar stood up and smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "There is an old tradition," the lizard alien said. "The trials of supremacy. When 2 species cannot agree on who is stronger, they settle it through combat. 10 champions fight for one side, and 1 champion fights for the other. The winner gets everything they want." Morrison felt cold fear run down his spine. He had heard stories about these trials from the history books. They were death matches, with no rules except that winners lived and losers died. No technology was allowed, just basic weapons and whatever strength each fighter could bring. "You want us to send 1 human against 10 of your best warriors," Morrison said. "Exactly," said Krextel, his crystal body ringing like a bell with excitement. "If humans are truly worthy of joining us, then 1 human should be able to defeat our champions. After all, you claim to have special abilities that make up for your physical weakness." Morrison looked around the circle and saw eager faces staring back at him. They thought this was a joke, a way to humiliate humanity and get rid of the human problem forever. They had probably already chosen their strongest fighters, aliens who had trained for centuries to kill other beings. "And if our champion loses," Morrison asked, knowing the answer already. "Then humanity never asks to join the inner circle again," said Nexara. "You will remain a minor species forever, limited to your small section of space." Morrison closed his eyes and thought about Earth. He thought about the billions of people who were counting on him to open doors to new technology and trade, routes that could solve hunger and disease. He thought about the colonies on the edge of human space that needed protection from raiders and pirates. The Inner Circle had the power to help with all of these problems, but only if humans could prove they belonged. "I need time to discuss this with my government," Morrison said. "You have 1 hour," said Sektar. "Take it or leave it. This offer will not come again." Morrison walked out of the council chamber with his head spinning. In the hallway, his aide Peter Collins was waiting with a worried expression. "Sir, they can't be serious about this," Peter said. "It's suicide. No human could fight 10 alien champions and win." Morrison nodded but said nothing. He was already thinking about the choice he had to make. Earth needed this chance, even if it meant certain death for whoever stepped into that arena. "Peter, send a message to Earth Command," Morrison said quietly. "Tell them about the challenge and tell them I accept." "Sir, you can't mean to fight yourself. You're a diplomat, not a gladiator." Morrison looked back at the council chamber door. "I'm also the only human here, and I won't ask someone else to die for a decision I have to make." He walked toward his quarters to begin preparing for what everyone would think was an impossible fight. Deep down, Morrison knew they were probably right, but he also knew that sometimes impossible was the only choice left. 3 months passed quickly as Jake Morrison pushed his body harder than ever before. Every morning started at 5 with running, followed by weight training, combat practice, and weapons drills. His muscles ached constantly, but he ignored the pain and kept working. The ship's gym became his second home, and the punching bags bore the marks of his determination. Morrison studied each alien champion like his life depended on it, because it did. The council had been happy to provide detailed files on their fighters, probably thinking it would scare him into backing down. Instead, Morrison read every report, watched every video, and memorized every detail about his 10 opponents. Rakthus was first on the list and possibly the most dangerous in close combat. The Gorvanian warrior stood 8 feet tall and weighed over 400 pounds of pure muscle and natural bone armor. His people came from a world with 3 times Earth's gravity, making them incredibly strong and tough. Rakthus had fought in over 50 death matches and never lost a single one. His claws could cut through steel, and his bone plates could stop bullets. Morrison watched videos of Rakthus fighting and saw the alien's weakness. The Gorvanian got angry fast and attacked without thinking when his opponent hurt him. Morrison made notes about using that anger against the big warrior. The second champion was Valandra from the Serpentine system. She looked almost human except for her snake-like flexibility and poisonous bite. Her bones could bend in ways that should be impossible, letting her slip out of any hold or squeeze through tiny spaces. Her venom could paralyze a victim in seconds, and her speed was incredible. She preferred to strike fast and then wait for the poison to do its work. Morrison practiced against flexible opponents in the ship's training room, learning to predict unusual movement patterns. He also studied antidotes for different types of poison, hoping to build some resistance. Thurgine represented the Mineral Coalition, and he was not really alive in the normal sense. The silicon-based being looked like a walking statue made of black rock. Bullets bounced off his skin like raindrops, and his punches could shatter concrete walls. He moved slowly but never got tired, and conventional weapons were useless against him. Morrison spent hours researching mineral properties and found that rapid temperature changes could crack even the strongest stones. He made plans to use fire, and ice if the arena allowed it. The fourth fighter was Zixler, an arachnoid from the spider worlds. He had 6 arms, each as strong as a human's leg, and could spin webs stronger than steel cables. His reaction time was 3 times faster than any human, and his multiple limbs let him attack and defend at the same time. He liked to trap his opponents in webs and then take his time killing them. Morrison practiced fighting against multiple attackers and studied structural engineering to understand how webs and cables worked. He learned about stress points and how to make strong materials fail. Mordek came from an ocean world where giant sea monsters ruled the depths. The amphibious warrior had gills and webbed hands, making him deadly in water or on land. He had been fighting for over 200 years and knew every combat technique ever developed by his people. His skin was tough like a shark's, and his teeth could bite through bone. Morrison learned to swim better and practiced holding his breath for longer periods. He studied underwater combat techniques and read about fighting in different environments. The sixth champion was Krisha, a flying predator whose people ruled the skies of their home planet. Her hollow bones made her light enough to fly, but she was still incredibly strong. Her talons could rip through armor, and her dive attacks reached speeds that could kill on impact. She preferred to attack from above where most ground fighters could not reach her. Morrison spent time learning about aerial combat and how to fight opponents who could fly. He practiced with thrown weapons and studied how to use terrain to limit a flying enemy's advantages. Nexum was the seventh fighter, and perhaps the strangest. He belonged to a hive mind species where every individual shared the memories and knowledge of the entire race. When he fought, he had access to millions of years of combat experience from thousands of different warriors. He knew every fighting style ever developed and could adapt to any strategy instantly. Morrison realized that conventional tactics would fail against such an opponent. He began practicing chaotic and unpredictable fighting styles, trying to develop moves that made no logical sense. The eighth champion was Turval, whose species had evolved to be perfect hunters. His natural camouflage made him nearly invisible, and he could remain perfectly still for hours while waiting for the right moment to strike. His patience was legendary, and he had once waited 3 days to kill a single target. Morrison worked on his senses, training to detect subtle movements and sounds. He studied hunting techniques and learned to trust his instincts about hidden dangers. Quinter was the ninth opponent and brought psychic powers to the fight. His people had developed mental abilities alongside their physical strength, letting them read their opponent's thoughts and intentions. He could sense attacks before they happened and influence his enemy's movements through subtle mental pressure. Morrison learned meditation techniques to clear his mind and practiced fighting while in extreme pain, hoping to disrupt psychic connections. With chaotic thoughts, the final champion was Golmeth, who had won the last trials of supremacy 300 years ago. He was a massive humanoid whose species had conquered their entire galaxy before joining the Council. Standing 10 feet tall and weighing over 600 pounds, he combined incredible strength with centuries of fighting experience. He had never been defeated in single combat and was considered the greatest warrior in Council history. Morrison knew that Golmeth would be his hardest opponent, but he also suspected the alien's greatest weakness might be overconfidence. After winning for so long, the champion might underestimate a desperate human with nothing to lose. As the months of training continued, Morrison's body changed. His muscles grew harder, his reflexes became faster, and his endurance improved dramatically. But more importantly, his mind became sharper and more focused. He learned to think like a warrior instead of a diplomat. Peter Collins watched his captain transform and worried about the cost. Morrison barely slept, ate only protein and vitamins, and spent every waking moment preparing for battle. His hair turned completely gray from stress, and his eyes took on a hard look that Peter had never seen before. "Sir, you're pushing yourself too hard," Peter said one evening after Morrison collapsed from exhaustion during training. Morrison pulled himself up from the floor and wiped blood from his split lip. "Not hard enough," he replied. "These aliens have had millions of years to evolve into perfect killers. I have 3 months to figure out how to beat them." As the transport ship approached Coliseum Station where the trials would take place, Morrison made his final preparations. He said goodbye to Peter and recorded messages for his family back on Earth. He wrote letters to the families of soldiers who had died under his command. Knowing he might not survive to deliver them personally, the night before the first fight, Morrison stood at the observation window and looked out at the ancient arena station. Tomorrow he would step into that ring and face impossible odds. He thought about all the humans counting on him and all the aliens expecting him to fail. Morrison smiled grimly and flexed his scarred hands. Let them underestimate the stubborn human. He had spent 3 months learning their strengths, but they knew nothing about humanity's greatest weapon, the refusal to quit when victory seemed impossible. The arena was bigger than Morrison had imagined. Coliseum stations stretched for miles in every direction, with seating for millions of spectators from across the galaxy. The fighting ring sat in the center like a giant bowl, surrounded by energy. Barriers that would contain the violence but let sound and images pass through to the crowds. Morrison walked through the tunnel toward the arena floor, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. He wore simple combat gear, leather armor, metal gauntlets, and boots with good grip. His weapons were basic too, a sword, a knife, and a small shield. The rules said no advanced technology, so both sides were limited to medieval-level equipment. The crowd noise hit him like a physical blow as he emerged into the arena. Millions of alien voices created a wall of sound that made his ears ring. Most of them were cheering for his death, placing bets on how quickly each champion would kill the lone human. Morrison ignored the noise and focused on the sandy floor. Beneath his feet, Rakthus waited on the other side of the arena, and seeing him in person was worse than any video. The Gorvanian warrior looked like a walking tank covered in bone armor. His claws gleamed in the artificial sunlight, and his yellow eyes burned with hunger for battle. The alien crowd roared approval as their champion raised his arms and flexed his massive muscles. "Begin," announced the arena computer in a voice that reached every corner of the station. Rakthus charged immediately, covering the distance between them in seconds. Morrison had expected this and rolled to the side, letting the big alien crash into the arena wall behind him. Bone armor was strong, but it was also heavy, and Rakthus took a moment to recover from the impact. Morrison used that moment to strike, driving his sword toward a gap between the bone plates on the alien's side. Rakthus twisted away, but the blade still drew blood. The Gorvanian roared in anger and swung his claws in a wide arc that would have cut Morrison in half if it had connected. The fight became a deadly dance around the arena floor. Rakthus was stronger and tougher, but Morrison was faster and smarter. Every time the alien warrior charged, Morrison moved aside and struck at weak points in the bone armor. The cuts were small, but they added up over time. Rakthus grew more frustrated with each missed attack. His charges became wilder and less controlled, exactly what Morrison had hoped for. When the Gorvanian finally overextended himself in a massive swing, Morrison was ready. He dropped low and drove his sword up through the gap under Rakthus' arm. Finding the heart beneath the bone plates, the big alien fell like a mountain, shaking the arena floor. Morrison pulled his sword free and raised it toward the crowd, which had gone silent with shock. The first victory was his, but it had cost him. His ribs ached from a glancing blow, and his left shoulder felt wrong when he moved it. Valandra entered the arena while medical robots removed Rakthus' body. The serpentine warrior moved like liquid, her flexible body swaying as she approached. She carried no weapons except her natural speed and poisonous bite. Her snake-like eyes never left Morrison as she began circling him like a predator. She struck. Without warning, her flexible body allowing her to attack from impossible angles. Morrison barely got his shield up in time to block her first bite, and her teeth left deep marks in the metal. She flowed around his defenses like water, always moving, always looking for an opening. Morrison realized he could not win a speed contest against her. Instead, he began using the arena itself as a weapon. He led her toward a pool of water that was part of the arena's decorative features, making her think he was trying to escape, when Valandra lunged for what she thought was a killing blow. Morrison rolled aside and grabbed her extended arm. Using her own momentum against her, he spun and threw her toward the pool. She hit the water hard and came up sputtering, her usually perfect balance disrupted by the unexpected bath. Morrison did not give her time to recover. He dove into the pool after her, using his superior weight and strength to hold her underwater. Valandra's flexibility meant nothing when she could not breathe, and her struggles grew weaker until they stopped completely. The crowd was no longer laughing. Two champions were dead, and the human was still standing. Morrison climbed out of the pool with water dripping from his armor and new cuts bleeding on his arms where Valandra's claws had found their mark. Thurgon entered next, and the arena floor shook with each step of the massive stone being. The silicon-based warrior looked like a walking mountain, and Morrison's sword bounced harmlessly off his rocky hide when he tested the alien's defenses, Morrison remembered his research about temperature shock and began moving toward the arena's environmental controls. The arena was designed to simulate different worlds, which meant it had systems for heating and cooling. He just had to figure out how to use them. The chase around the arena looked like a comedy to the watching crowd. The huge stone alien moved slowly but steadily, while Morrison darted between obstacles and tried to stay ahead of those crushing fists. When Thurgon's punch connected with a wall, it left a crater in the metal. Morrison found what he was looking for near the arena's heating vents. He lured Thurgon close to the superheated air, letting the stone warrior absorb as much heat as possible. Then he led the alien toward the cooling systems on the opposite side of the arena. The rapid temperature change did exactly what Morrison had hoped. Cracks appeared in Thurgon's rocky surface as his body expanded and contracted too quickly. Morrison struck at the largest crack with his sword, driving the blade deep into the fissure. The stone warrior crumbled like a broken statue. 3 down, 7 to go. Morrison's body was starting to fail him. His shoulder was definitely dislocated, several ribs were cracked, and cuts covered his arms and legs. But he was still alive. And that was more than anyone had expected. Zixler scuttled into the arena on 6 legs, his spider-like body moving with inhuman grace. The arachnoid immediately began spinning webs, creating a maze of nearly invisible strands that would trap Morrison. If he was not careful, the fight became a careful game of movement and positioning. Morrison had to watch for webs while avoiding the alien's multiple striking arms. Zixler's speed was incredible, but Morrison had studied the structural properties of spider silk and knew how to make it fail. He began systematically destroying the web supports, causing sections of the trap to collapse under their own weight. When Zixler tried to repair the damage, Morrison struck at the spider alien's legs, reducing his mobility with each successful hit. The end came when Morrison managed to tangle Zixler in his own webs. The arachnoid's struggles only made the situation worse, and Morrison was able to finish him while he was trapped and helpless. Mordek rose from another pool in the arena floor, his gills fluttering as he breathed water and air equally well. The amphibious warrior carried a trident and net, weapons that could work on land or in water. His shark-like teeth gleamed as he smiled at the bleeding human. Morrison knew this fight would be about endurance as much as skill. Mordek had 200 years of experience, but he also had the arrogance that came with always winning. Morrison decided to turn the battle into a test of human stubbornness against alien confidence. The fight lasted for over an hour. Morrison took hit after hit from the trident, but he kept coming back for more. He absorbed punishment that would have killed most beings, but he never stopped moving or attacking. Slowly he began to wear down the ancient warrior's patience. When Mordek finally made a mistake, overextending himself in frustration, Morrison was there with his knife. The amphibian's superior experience meant nothing when faced with a human who simply refused to stay down. 5 champions were dead, and Morrison was barely conscious on his feet. Blood loss and exhaustion made every movement agony, but he raised his sword again as the crowd. Noise changed from mockery to something like respect. The alien council members were no longer smiling as they watched their supposedly inferior human tier through their greatest warriors. For the first time in galactic history, someone was making them question what they thought they knew about strength and weakness. Morrison swayed on his feet as he waited for the 6th champion to enter the arena. His vision was blurry from blood loss, but his grip on his sword remained steady. Whatever came next, he would face it standing, because that was what humans did when the odds were impossible. Morrison could barely see straight as Krisha entered the arena. The flying predator's wings cast shadows across the sandy floor as she circled overhead like a vulture waiting for death. Her talons looked sharp enough to cut steel, and her hollow bones allowed her to move through the air with deadly grace. The medical robots had offered Morrison treatment between fights, but he had refused anything that might be seen as outside help. His left arm hung useless at his side, blood soaked through his leather armor, and every breath sent sharp pain through his broken ribs. But his sword arm still worked, and that was enough. Krisha dove from high above, her talons extended to rip him apart. Morrison threw himself sideways, feeling the wind from her passage as she missed by inches. She pulled up sharply and climbed for another attack. Her alien crowd cheering her graceful flight, Morrison realized he needed to bring her down to his level. The arena had tall metal towers that supported the energy barriers, and electrical systems hummed inside them. If he could reach the electromagnetic field generators, he might be able to disrupt her flight. The next dive attack came faster than before. Morrison rolled away again, but this time Krisha's claws caught his back, tearing through leather and flesh. He bit back a scream and kept moving toward the nearest tower. Krisha's confidence grew with each successful strike. She began playing with him, making shallow cuts instead of going for quick kills. Her people were proud hunters, and she wanted to show off her skills to the watching. Galaxy. Morrison reached the tower and began climbing the maintenance ladder with one good arm. Krisha shrieked in anger and dove at him, but the narrow space between tower supports limited her movement. Morrison timed his jump perfectly, grabbing onto her leg as she passed and using his weight to drag her down. They crashed to the arena floor together, but Morrison had been ready for the impact while Krisha had not. Before she could recover, he drove his knife between her ribs, finding the heart that pumped blood through her hollow bones. 6 champions dead. Morrison's legs shook as he stood up, and dark spots danced at the edges of his vision. He was dying slowly from blood loss and internal injuries, but he was still alive while his opponents were not. Nexum entered the arena with quiet confidence. The hive mind warrior looked almost human except for the silver patches on his skin that connected him to his species' collective consciousness. He carried a simple sword and shield, but Morrison knew those weapons came with the skill of 1,000,000 different fighters. The battle began carefully, with each warrior testing the other's defenses. Nexum adapted to Morrison's fighting style, within minutes, countering every technique and predicting every attack. The alien's movements became smoother and more efficient as he accessed more combat. Memories from his hive mind, Morrison realized that fighting normally would be suicide. Nexum could learn from every exchange and become better, while Morrison was getting weaker and slower. He needed to do something that no warrior in galactic history had ever tried. Morrison began fighting like a madman. He threw away everything he had learned about proper technique and started moving in completely random patterns. He attacked when he should defend, defended when he should attack, and made moves that served no tactical purpose at all. The strategy worked because it made no sense. Nexum's hive mind was designed to learn from logical opponents, but Morrison was deliberately being illogical. The alien warrior's confidence began to crack as his predictive abilities failed against human chaos. When Nexum finally made a mistake, trying to counter an attack that never came, Morrison was there with his sword. The hive mind warrior fell with a look of confusion on his face, unable to understand how random madness had defeated millions of years of collected wisdom. 7 down. Morrison collapsed to his knees and coughed up blood. His body was shutting down from trauma and exhaustion, but his mind remained clear. 3 opponents remained, including the legendary Golmeth who had never tasted defeat. Turval entered the arena like a ghost. The perfect hunter's camouflage made him nearly invisible against the arena's varied terrain. Morrison could see occasional flickers of movement, but tracking the alien was almost impossible with his damaged vision. The waiting was the hardest part. Morrison knew Turval was somewhere in the arena, probably watching and planning the perfect moment to strike. The hunter's patience was legendary, and he could wait for hours if necessary. Morrison closed his eyes and tried to focus on his other senses. He listened for the soft sound of footsteps in sand, felt for the tiny vibrations that meant something was moving nearby. and trusted instincts that millions of years of evolution had built into human DNA, the attack came from behind, fast and silent. Morrison spun and caught Torvalds' blade on his shield, the impact nearly breaking his already damaged arm. The hunter's camouflage flickered as he moved. Giving Morrison brief glimpses of his location, they fought across the entire arena, with Turval appearing and disappearing like a deadly shadow. Morrison took hit after hit from attacks he could barely see coming, but he kept fighting back with desperate determination. The end came when Morrison stopped trying to see his opponent and started feeling for him instead. When Turval's next attack came, Morrison was ready with a counter-strike that found its mark through pure instinct. 8 champions were dead, and Morrison was dying. Blood ran from dozens of cuts, his breathing was shallow and rapid, and his legs could barely support his weight. The arena floor was painted red with his blood, but he still held his sword. Quinter entered with flowing robes that hid his muscular frame. The psychic warrior's mental abilities were already probing Morrison's mind, trying to read his thoughts and intentions. Morrison felt the alien's presence like cold fingers inside his skull. The psychic pressure made every movement feel slow and clumsy. Morrison knew what he wanted to do, but his body responded sluggishly to his commands. Quinter smiled as he easily dodged attacks that should have connected, his mental powers giving him warning of every strike. Morrison remembered his training about fighting through pain and began. Deliberately aggravating his injuries, he pressed against his broken ribs until the agony was overwhelming, focusing on the physical suffering until it drowned out everything else. The plan worked better than he had hoped. The intense pain disrupted Quinter's mental reading, creating static in the psychic connection. For the first time in the fight, Morrison's attacks became unpredictable. Quinter's confidence cracked as his powers failed him. Without his mental advantages, he was just another strong alien facing a human who refused to quit. Morrison's sword found its target just as his vision went completely black from the pain. 9 champions dead. Morrison collapsed face first in the sand and did not get up for several minutes. When he finally managed to push himself to his knees, the arena was completely silent. Even the alien crowds had stopped cheering, awed by what they were witnessing. Morrison knew he would not survive another fight. His body had already given everything it had to give, and only willpower was keeping him conscious. But one opponent remained, and that opponent was the strongest of them all. Golmoth entered the arena like an earthquake-given form. The massive warrior stood 10 feet tall and weighed over 600 pounds of pure muscle and bone. His presence seemed to fill the entire space, and even the arena lights appeared dimmer in his shadow. Morrison tried to stand and fell back to his knees. He tried again and managed to get 1 foot under him before his leg gave out. The crowd watched in fascination as the broken human struggled to rise for his final battle. "Stay down, little human," Golmoth said in a voice like rolling thunder. "You have fought well, but this ends now. I will make your death quick and honorable." Morrison looked up at the towering alien champion and smiled through blood-stained teeth. He had come too far to quit now, even if his body was completely destroyed. With tremendous effort, he forced himself to stand on shaking legs and raised his sword one final time. The greatest warrior in galactic history faced off against a dying human who should have been in a medical bed. Everyone knew how this fight would end, but they watched anyway. Drawn by the incredible determination of a species they had dismissed as weak, Morrison swayed on his feet and waited for death to come. But he would meet it standing, sword in hand, because that was what it meant to be human. Golmoth walked slowly toward Morrison, his massive feet leaving deep prints in the blood-soaked sand. The ancient champion moved with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat, his muscles rippling beneath skin that looked tough as armor plating. 300 years of victories had taught him that smaller opponents always fell quickly once he applied his full strength. Morrison could barely lift his sword, but he kept the blade pointed toward his final enemy. Every breath was agony. His vision blurred in and out of focus, and his legs shook like leaves in a storm. The medical scanners showed that he was dying from internal bleeding and organ damage, but somehow he remained standing. "I respect your courage, human," Golmouth said as he drew closer. But courage without strength is meaningless. You have proven your species fights well, but now you must accept defeat gracefully. The massive alien swung his weapon, a warhammer, that weighed more than Morrison's entire body. The human threw himself sideways, barely avoiding the blow that shattered the arena floor where he had been standing. He rolled badly on his broken ribs and screamed in pain, but forced himself back. To his feet, Golmouth laughed, a sound like boulders falling down a mountain. Impressive reflexes for a dying creature. But you cannot dodge forever, and I have all the time in the galaxy. Morrison said nothing, saving his energy for staying alive. He had studied Golmouth's fighting style during his months of preparation, looking for weaknesses in the seemingly perfect warrior. The alien was incredibly strong and skilled, but he was also arrogant. 3 centuries of easy victories had made him overconfident. The next attack came faster, a sideways sweep that would have cut Morrison in half. He dropped flat to the ground, feeling the hammer pass inches over his head. Before Golmouth could recover, Morrison rolled between the alien's legs and slashed at the back of his knee. The sword barely scratched Golmouth's tough skin, but it was the first time anyone had drawn blood from the legendary champion in over 200 years. The alien crowd gasped in amazement, and even the council members leaned forward in their seats. Interesting, Golmouth mused, examining the tiny cut on his leg. You are faster than you look, little human. But speed means nothing without the power to do real damage. Morrison backed away, trying to put distance between himself and the giant warrior. His mind raced through everything he had learned about fighting impossible opponents. Strength would not work against Golmouth. Speed alone was not enough. But there was one weapon that no alien species had ever developed: pure human stubbornness. Golmouth charged forward with surprising speed for his size. Morrison waited until the last second before diving aside, but this time the alien was ready for the dodge. The warhammer changed direction in mid-swing, catching Morrison in the ribs and sending him flying across the arena. Morrison hit the wall hard and slid to the ground, coughing up blood and struggling to breathe. Several more ribs had broken from the impact, and his internal injuries were getting worse. He could feel his strength draining away like water from a broken cup. That was your last dodge, Golmouth announced, walking over to where Morrison lay crumpled against the wall. Accept your death with dignity, and I will tell the galaxy that humans fight with honor. Morrison looked up at the towering alien and did something unexpected. He smiled. You don't understand, Morrison said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm not trying to win anymore. I'm trying to teach you something. Golmouth paused, confused by the human's words. Teach me what? Morrison pushed himself away from the wall and stood up again, swaying dangerously, but still upright. Blood ran from his mouth and nose. His left arm was completely useless, and his legs could barely support his weight. But his sword arm still worked, and his eyes still burned with determination. I'm teaching you what it means to fight a human, Morrison said. The alien champion's confusion turned to irritation. He had offered the human an honorable death, and Morrison was rejecting it for no logical reason. Golmouth raised his hammer for a finishing blow that would end this pointless struggle. Morrison did not try to dodge this time. Instead, he stepped forward into the attack, accepting the hammer blow to his shoulder in exchange for getting close enough to strike at Golmouth's chest. His sword found a gap between the alien's natural armor plates, drawing real blood for the first time. The crowd fell silent as both warriors staggered apart. Morrison's shoulder was completely destroyed, but Golmouth was actually wounded. The legendary champion looked down at the red stain spreading across his chest with genuine surprise. Impossible, Golmouth muttered. No one has injured me in combat for over 2 centuries. Morrison swayed on his feet, his sword held in his one remaining good hand. He was dying rapidly now, his body shutting down from massive trauma. But he was still standing, still fighting, still refusing to quit. You aliens don't understand humans, Morrison said, his voice getting weaker. You think we're weak because we don't have claws or armor or psychic powers, but you missed our real weapon. Golmouth pressed his hand against his wound, feeling Blood leaked between his fingers. The injury was not serious, but it should not have been possible at all. What weapon? We don't know when to quit, Morrison replied. The final exchange came when Golmeth, frustrated and angry for the first time in centuries, abandoned his careful technique and attacked with pure rage. Morrison had been waiting for exactly this moment. When the perfect warrior would make an imperfect choice, Morrison stepped into the attack again, taking a crushing blow to his chest that shattered his sternum and stopped his heart for several seconds. But in that same instant, he drove his sword up under Golmeth's ribcage, finding the alien's heart with his final attack. Both warriors fell together in the center of the arena. Golmeth died instantly, his eyes wide with shock that anyone could have defeated him. Morrison collapsed beside his opponent, his body finally giving up after enduring more punishment than any human should have survived. The arena was completely silent for long minutes. Medical robots rushed onto the sand to check both fighters, and the galaxy held its breath waiting for the results. When the lead robot finally spoke, its mechanical voice carried to every corner of the station. "Golmeth is dead," the robot announced. "Morrison is alive but critical." The crowd exploded into chaos. Alien voices screamed in dozens of languages as the impossible results sank in. The human had done it. All 10 champions were dead, and Jake Morrison had somehow survived to claim victory. Medical teams worked frantically to keep Morrison alive as they transported him to the station's best hospital. His heart had stopped twice during the fight. Most of his bones were broken, and his internal organs were badly damaged. But he was breathing, and that was enough. 3 days later, Morrison woke up in a hospital bed surrounded by machines keeping his body functioning. His first visitor was Krextal, the crystal being who had insulted humanity at the council meeting. The alien's attitude had changed completely. "Captain Morrison," Krextal said formally, "the Galactic Council has voted unanimously to admit humanity to the Inner Circle. Your victory has earned your species the respect and recognition they deserve." Morrison tried to speak but could only manage a whisper. "It wasn't about winning. It was about showing you who we are." Over the following weeks, as Morrison slowly recovered, alien diplomats lined up to meet the human who had redefined their understanding of strength and weakness. They wanted to learn about human determination, human adaptability, and the human refusal to surrender when victory seemed impossible. Morrison spent months in recovery, but the doctors said he would eventually make a full recovery. His body would heal, but the scars would remain as reminders of the day one human faced 10 alien champions and walked away victorious. The story spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Human colonies on the edge of space heard about Morrison's victory and stood a little taller when aliens looked down on them. Earth's children learned about the day their species earned its place among the stars through courage and determination rather than superior technology. When Morrison finally returned to Earth, he was greeted as a hero. But he always insisted that his victory belonged to all of humanity, not just to him. He had simply shown the galaxy what humans were capable of when they refused to give up. The title of the trials had been fulfilled in the most literal way possible. 10 alien champions had entered the arena, but only one being walked away. That being was human, and his victory opened doors to a future where humanity would never again be dismissed as weak or unworthy. In the end, Morrison had taught the galaxy the most important lesson about humans. They might not be the strongest or the fastest, but they would never stop fighting for what they believed in, no matter how impossible the odds might seem.